All right, let's do that.
Okay, we're live.
All right, thank you for joining us. We've just said the Pledge of Allegiance, and now we'll move on to our agenda, which item we've called to order. So we'll move slide to item 2, a roll call of members who are on the call, please. Agenda, which we've called to order. So we'll move slide to item 2, a roll call of members who are on the call, please.
Amy Malden.
We're getting an echo. I don't know if we should have that or not.
People should go on mute if you're not talking.
We're getting an echo.
They're now on
I don't know if
mute.
we should have that or not.
No, there's several members that aren't on mute. People should go on mute if you're not talking.
Bob's not on mute.
No, there's several members that aren't on mute.
Bob's not on mute. Michael, did we fix this? Can we take a roll call? Who's going to do the roll call?
I will. Director Scott Haggerty,
Here.
Director Melissa Hernandez,
Here.
Director David Habert,
Here.
Director Carla Brown,
Here.
Director Bob Coomber,
Here.
Vice Chair Bob Warner,
Here.
and Director Jerry Penton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to item 3. Jennifer, will you move the next slide to item 3? Michael, is Jennifer there?
I'm here. I'm moving Herb over as a panelist right now.
Oh, okay. Why don't we get all that done?
Herb, can you hear me? Because you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I don't have a camera though. My
It's
camera.
okay, go ahead with your
We can
report.
hear
out.
you.
Okay, well, I'm used to video. Alrighty, let me get to my notes now on my other device. Where is it?
Are there any other speakers from the public, Jennifer, besides Herb?
No, he's the only one.
Any other advisory committee members? Nope, very good.
No, it's just me. Amy's on, but I'm giving a report.
Thank you, Herb.
And I have the copy of the minutes on my phone. So I have everything. Our last meeting was Wednesday, March 4th, about a week before the quarantine. And we have not met since then, unfortunately. But during the last meeting, we did, the staff gave a report on the Go Dublin program. They gave the updated as of at that time during the week during that period of time and followed up any questions that we had and said something about the first and last mile solution of people who need to share the share ride program for the Dublin Go. Then we also discussed the upcoming terms period for recruitment for the coming year for the members that were terming out this year at the end of the term. You should have a list of the current ones in the agenda, in your packets of the members. And we also talked about the paratransit plan submission that staff put in for the Actia Measure B. And then we had a small report about the parataxi brochure. Staff had described some of the changes in the packet and gave us all an example of what the packet looked like. Then they brought out the proposal for the free fares for the fixed route buses. And so we were able to ask a few questions regarding that. In your packet, hopefully Kadri made a copy. I was able to send over a signed support letter from the advisory committee with should be in your packet, stating that we support it and would like to see it implemented during the year, whenever the time period starts. And then we got our PACO report from Esther from the last PACO meeting, which was in January at that time. And then we got a little bit of report about ongoing issues from the members for the fixed route and the dial-ride services over the year, or over that time frame. And that's basically my report. And I hope everyone else is doing fine because of the COVID situation.
Herb, thank you very much. And with that, we'll move on to the consent calendar.
David, this is Jennifer. There is one person that looks like they wanted to do public comment.
Okay. Do we have a name?
I don't. It says Teamsters Local 70.
Okay. Well, would Teamsters Local 70 like to make a public comment? Or thank you for joining us anyway, but we're happy to have you comment.
Good afternoon, everybody. So this is Rich Fierro from Teamsters Local 70. I represent the bus drivers for the fixed route right in your building there. And my main focus for coming on today was just to say thank you to the board, to Tamara, to Tone, to Michael Tree, to the management at MV for their leadership role during these tough times. Because you all have done everything you possibly could to make sure that you could take care of our drivers the best that you could, financially and safety-wise too. You guys have been a leader as far as safety provisions and disinfectant and everything you have done. We really appreciate that. So I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the drivers and acknowledge that. I also know that you're trying to figure out what the best steps are going forward. So I'm interested to hear what the report is later in the agenda. I'm available if any of you have any questions. I also wanted to thank Board Member Haggerty for swinging the bat for our union to be on the MTC Blue Ribbon Committee. Some of the recommendations we're going to be making are that the other transit agencies follow some of the things that you guys have already done. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Rich, thank you for coming and speaking. With that, we'll move on to the consent calendar item. And I'll move the consent calendar.
I'll second.
David, I'm trying to get my hand up.
Okay, how do I see the hands raised?
You know what? I'm trying to get it up. It's not going up, but if you go,
Oh,
if you bring
okay.
up participants, you can see everybody, but that's neither here nor there. I just wanted to say if Rich could maybe call into the MTC meeting and make those same comments, I think it would be most helpful. And I would certainly appreciate it if you would do that.
I'd be glad to if you
Still
let
on,
me
right?
know the agenda or when to call.
I'm sorry, what?
I would be happy to if you just could have somebody let me know when the meeting is, and you know, I'd be definitely glad to call in.
Thanks. I'll have Sean call you.
Excellent. Very good. With that, there's a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. I believe we'll do this with the roll call vote. Is that right?
That is correct. Scott Haggerty,
Yes.
Melissa Hernandez,
Aye.
David Hubbard,
Yes.
Carla Brown,
Yes.
Jerry Penton,
Yes.
Bob Coomber,
Yes.
Bob Warner.
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Item 6 is the 2020 audit of Lavda's financial statements.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to quickly introduce David Alvey. He is the head of our audit team. He comes every year to speak to the F&A committee. However, we didn't have a meeting, so he's at our meeting here. I will just also let you know he has another meeting at 4:30, so we'll hopefully keep this
Talk
brief.
quick. Let's go, David.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. My name is David Alvey. I'm the audit partner, Mason Associates, and our job every year is to come in and do the financial statement audit of LAFTA. And I have in the agenda packet our standard communication memo. We have to come and talk to you about two things. Statement of Auditing Standards 114 kind of goes through the whole audit process, a high-level overview. And Statement 99 having to tell you what we do and what we don't do in terms of fraud. So starting with the overview, we actually wrapped up our interim phase a couple weeks ago, and we'll be doing our final phase once the books are closed after June 30. And just to kind of go through the process from start to finish, we start with a brainstorming session with the entire audit team, and we look at LAFTA as to where we think the risks of material misstatement might be. And those risks, we have to mitigate those risks to get comfort with the financial statements, and that morphs into our audit plan. And we perform that. And when we were out during the interim phase, we were looking purely at internal controls. We wanted to see segregation of duties. And the idea is if LAFTA's internal control environment is strong, then we don't have to do as much testing of the balances at year end. So that's the idea of the internal control component of our interim phase of our audit. So during that interim phase, things that are subject to our testing are disbursements, payroll, journal entries, any kind of other payments that go out. We look at those. We also do an information system report where we have our IT department look at the vulnerabilities of your IT system to see if there's anything that can be fixed there. We set up our confirmations for June 30, and then when we come back at final, that's when we do our analysis of last year over current year. It's called an analytical review, and ask a bunch of questions of Tamara, and she's really good about answering. We do our projection and forecasts of revenue, and then that's when we test all the year-end balances, the bank reconciliations, obviously all the retirement and OPEB actuary reports. Those are a big component now after GASB 68 and 75 got issued. We do compliance testing as well, not only of your own local investment and policy and purchasing policy and payroll policy, but also the government code to make sure that LAFTA is in compliance with that as well. And usually the government code are focused mostly around investments and disbursements. We also will perform the single audit along with all the measures audits as well. Single audit is for federal funds over 750,000. So you guys usually, I think in the couple years that I've been with LAFTA, it's only been 1 year that you didn't meet that threshold to require a single audit. We help prepare the financials, and what I mean by that is we download the general ledger information for June 30, and we put it in our system that creates the financials that you see. But we're not booking anything without asking Tamara, or we're not taking ownership of those financials. It's truly management's role to take ownership of the financials and the internal control environment. And we're satisfied that you have people on staff that have the skills, knowledge, and experience to review those financials and know what they're looking at. And at the very last thing we do before we issue our audit opinion is we do our management representation letter. And that's signed by management, and it says that they haven't withheld anything from us. They don't know of anything that would change our audit opinion. So that's the scope and timing. In terms of fraud, from a financial statement perspective, we're looking at material misstatements due to error or fraud. So in that, we look at fraudulent financial reporting. So that would be cooking the books, making revenues higher, expense lower. And then we look at misappropriation of assets, and that's actual money walking out the door. And the SAS requires us to talk to the board. And the questions I have for you, it's always hard to do these questions in a public meeting. So I have provided my email address and my phone number at the bottom of the memo. So the questions, and you don't have to respond right now, but are you aware of any fraud at LAFTA from July 1, 2019 to today's date? Are there areas that you think are more vulnerable that you would like to tell the auditor about? Are there any related party transactions between board members and vendors? And do you feel that all LAFTA employees are honest and have integrity? So if the answers to those questions, the first three are anything other than no, and the last one, anything other than yes, you don't need to email me. If you have something you want to tell me or bring to my attention, please reach out to me. Just in closing, the SAS requires us to really focus on high risk areas, and those are improper revenue recognition and management's override of the internal control environment. Because management is tasked with creating and maintaining and monitoring this segregation of duties, they sometimes can circumvent those controls to get things done. So we take those into account when we do our risk assessment. And with that, I'd just like to open up to any questions you might have on the process.
Okay, so this is where I have to get good at checking out. See, there's 17 panelists and only a few people. Anybody have their hand raised, just speak up. I see nobody reaching for the unmute button. When will we see you again, David?
We come back in October, is it tomorrow? I think when we come back, we'll take the draft to you and then we go final.
November,
thank you.
November.
All right. Information item only. Item 7 now is the executive director's report.
All right, everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, I'm going to put on just a couple of slides here to walk through the executive director's report. It's been super busy during the COVID-19 pandemic, and as you're aware, our ridership virtually overnight dropped 90%, going from 7,000 riders a day during pre-COVID to about 660 rides per day was the bottom. We've since then been kind of steadily increasing the ridership. We're currently now just under 1,000 rides per day as of the last week of May. And then with the paratransit, equally, we were at 150 rides per day kind of pre-COVID, and we dropped to 30 rides per day that first week of April as kind of a low point. And then we're working our way back up approximately 40 rides a day the ending week of April. We've been asked, what has been our response and our action plan moving forward as the pandemic continues and hopefully dwindles, and hopefully we see a vaccination widely available at some point. But staff has been working off from a response and an action plan to assure the public that we're safe to be on. I thought I'd go through really quickly the kind of the more lengthy version of this response and action plan is attached to the executive director's report. I took kind of the key bullet points off of that for these slides. So I'll go through them quickly, but in essence, the first thing we did right out of the gate was we insisted on daily cleaning and disinfecting of the buses. And we are using a hospital grade disinfectant, both at the transit centers daily and on board each of the buses that have gone out. We have insisted that our operators are offered hand sanitizer, gloves, and face coverings at the start of their shift. And they're wearing those face coverings while they're operating the bus. And, we've had some issues here and there, but I think by far and away, our drivers have been really exemplary in the way that they've responded with their personal protective equipment. And we've also been able to provide face coverings for passengers. We have a mandate on the buses that the passengers need to wear the face coverings. We're probably handing out about 10 to 15 of those face coverings each day for riders who don't have them. Other items that we're doing, our marketing department certainly is getting CDC guidance and tips posted on the buses and at the facilities. And to really kind of protect the operators, very early on, we went fare free on the bus system. And we basically taped off the front entry so that it was only rear boardings and getting off the bus only through the rear door. And then that kept the riders from getting close to the drivers. So, I think the purpose has played out in doing that, in that we haven't had operators with the COVID-19 thus far. Just a couple more items that are listed in that response and action plan. We are maintaining that CDC guidance of 6 feet. And, it hasn't been perfect. We haven't put dots on the floor or taped off certain seats, but we have put on signage that promotes that social distancing. And the drivers, I think, have been good at working with the riders with the social distancing issues and the exceptions, such as if you get on board the bus with your family. We have been really closely monitoring the demand on the bus systems. On the bus system on a daily basis, we look at the loading of the buses by trip. And really, for the most part, we've been able to maintain that guidance of 6 feet and not overload the bus where the passengers would be closer than that 6 foot. A couple of times per day, very randomly, we see a number that just bumps above what we recommend on the buses. For example, 10 riders on a 40-foot bus. We've also been working really hard behind the scenes to improve the passenger technology or the passenger experience, and being able to view in real time the loads on the buses. So Tone, our Director of Operations and Innovation, has been working with the transit app that we use and that many of the agencies use in the Bay Area. And very soon, as you go into that transit app, and you look at the next bus coming to pick you up at a particular bus stop, you'll actually see a bubble which will contain the number of people that are actually on that bus in real time. So it'll help folks kind of manage the loads and their schedules. And then finally, we had mentioned previous, but wanted to mention again, we've implemented Go Tri-Valley. So there's actually some alternatives as we move forward that we're educating and making our riders aware of. So I'm sure that there'll be a response or two, but I did want to get to you what our action plan has been moving forward. And we're working closely with the other operators in the Bay Area, and then also watching really closely what folks are doing both across the US and internationally to really, as we move forward, try and have the best recovery that we can. And I've been impressed with the Blue Ribbon Task Force that Chair Scott Haggerty set up at MTC. Calls are happening on a daily basis, basically to survey and to understand how to move forward in a real unified way with an action plan. So I've got a couple other things here under the Executive Director's report. Certainly would want to make mention or acknowledge a lot of work that's going on with the Valley Link Rail project that your staff's involved with. Modeling of the operations and the ridership of the train for the 12-minute frequency throughout the train system has been a big load. And from that, we have verified that the 12-minute frequency throughout the system works, and we're working on the ridership modeling now that would reflect that 12-minute frequency, and also a reduction in the scheduled trip time. So ridership, I'm sure that at this next board meeting for ValleyLink, that the board will see a substantial ridership increase on the ValleyLink system based on that. With that comes an update of the 15% design to show these new passing lanes that allow the 12-minute frequency. I've had a lot of questions about the EIR or the CEQA work that we're doing for the project, and certainly would want to make mention that a lot of folks are working on that behind the scenes, and that the draft is still on target to come out for the public to comment on that draft EIR in September, with the hope that the board can certify the EIR and adopt the project by the end of the calendar year. We have an MTC allocation request in that will be heard by the Programming and Allocations Committee this week for $46.8 million for ValleyLink. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to talk about that, but that has been a lot of work to put together. And then ACTC at their last commission meeting in May opened the 45-day comment period for the proposed amendment or the requested amendment to Measure BB to include the ValleyLink project and to move the $400 million in Measure BB from the BART to Livermore project to the ValleyLink project. And then we've been working with the city of Tracy, who is providing property at no cost to the agency for the O&M facility. And then certainly would want to make mention that available online is an economic impact study of ValleyLink showing that the project during the construction phasing creates a total of 22,000 jobs. And we used a model from the American Public Transit Association as we built those numbers. And so they're solid, and their industry, they're recognized in the industry as accurate. So that's a great study to go look at. It's presented in slides that are pretty easy to read on the valleylinkrail.com website. Certainly want to mention again, Tony and his crew in the marketing department. Telly Awards are a pretty big deal in marketing. We were notified this last month that we received a Telly Award for the ValleyLink video that you're all familiar with. So that's exciting. We'll receive that award in the near future. And then also Superintendent Bowers from the Livermore School District notified us that we had received a Partner in Education Award from the school district for the work that we've done with the Clipper card and with the Measure BB student program there to get students with a Clipper card and allow them to ride the bus at no cost. And then finally, a couple of last items. Geez, we're on track is all I'll say. We're on track to start testing by the end of June. Everything's lining up. We're not seeing any obstacles at this point, so we'll keep you posted, but just wanted to let you know that this SAV project continues to move forward, and Tone's doing a great job with that. We are seeing kind of an uptick in the number of homeless folks that are residing in Wheels bus stops. So I did want to make mention that we have been working in particular with the city of Pleasanton on the game plan for having folks vacate the shelters who are living in them. And I think we've been working really closely with Pleasanton PD and with social services and mental health to really approach this in a good way to try and provide assistance, but bottom line, also to provide a good experience for the bus riders. And this particular stop is by the Walmart off of Owens and Rosewood. And so it's a busy stop. And as you can see, a gentleman's moved in and really created a situation where the riders can't use that stop. So long story short, we're working on it. We have a game plan, and it's holistic, and we're hopeful for some good results. I also put in your executive director's report some information on the Atlantis transit facility. And You know, as I'm looking through my notes, my goodness, we've been working on this project for almost 20 years, and it's got multiple grant awards attributed to it, both federal and state. So long story short, we're at a space here over at Rutan, and the agency with these grant awards in 2006 purchased property over off of Atlantis. The name of the street is Atlantis. It's in the Oak Business Park. And this really is to provide LAFTA moving forward the space it needs to expand and continue to offer good quality service. And so in 2006, the agency purchased the property, did the first conceptual design in 2008, which is what you see. The building right in front of you is the operations facility. And then the building across the cement deck where the buses are stored is the maintenance facility. And then you'll see to the left of these two buildings, the bus wash and the fueling station. So after doing the conceptual in 08, the agency moved forward and, as you know, has built the cement deck for the buses that's seen between the buildings, and also has constructed the bus wash and the fueling facility. And so with the hint that there could be some stimulus funding perhaps coming down the road, and also with the recognition that ACTC has this project now in their top 10, or not top 10, in their 10-year capital project list, we have taken the plans off the shelf and have begun to work with the consulting team, Kimley Horn, on this project. Again, it's slated to be a design build project. So our goal is to have some conceptual design work done in the next few months, and then have the 30% design work done within 12 months. And so the project and services committee will be working with the consultant at your upcoming meeting on this project. So wanted to make sure you were aware that we were working on it behind the scenes, and that soon that would be involving the board in that. And then also we put some money in the capital budget that you'll be considering later in the agenda for that. And I did want to certainly acknowledge that you approved in your consent calendar an MOU with the County of Alameda in regard to the parking garage that's near the Dublin Pleasanton BART station. That project's moving. We're hoping to see the ground, the dirt moved for at least street improvements in the fall, and then construction throughout 2021. And then finally, certainly in your packet, you've got today with you Thomas Whitman with Tony McCauley, your Director of Planning. We wanted to walk through what we've done with operations since the start of COVID-19, and kind of how we see things phasing as we move forward. That's on your agenda. And then I certainly would want to just recognize your budget being on the agenda. We passed a place setter budget in a previous board meeting, told you we'd be back with a more realistic view of expenditures with the operations budget. And also we have some adjustments with your capital budget. But if I had to give you 3 key bullet points to keep in mind as you're listening to Tamara on the budget piece, it would be that, you know, due to a really quick reaction by staff with COVID-19, we actually balanced your fiscal year 20 operating budget. However, with your fiscal year 21 budget, it took all of the CARES Act, both the first and the second tranche. It will take those 2 tranches to actually balance your operating budget in fiscal year 21. And that's with having reduced your service levels to basically Saturday service. But, you know, those are 3 key sound bites. You balanced your budget in fiscal year 20 from an operations perspective. You need all of your CARES Act to balance your operating budget in fiscal year 21. And then if no other state or federal assistance, stimulus, if you will, or additional CARES Act money becomes available and the economy's still kind of in the dumps, fiscal year 2022 looks pretty difficult. So as you'll recall, I just had mentioned it took all $5 million of the CARES Act money, both tranches, to balance your fiscal year 21 budget. So with that, I'll be quiet. And if you have any questions in regard to the executive director's report, I didn't hit on everything. But if you have any questions, I'm certainly available for questions.
All right. Anybody want to raise their hand? I see nobody rushing to do that. Michael, thank you for your,
This is Bob. If I could ask one.
Bob, go for it.
Okay, one real quick. You mentioned that you're providing the face coverings for the buses, and we've seen a lot of articles recently about people objecting to that and even being violent in stores. Any issues with the people accepting the face coverings?
Not that I'm aware of. Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in our staff meetings each morning, we've been looking at what number of masks have been given out, and I'm not aware of anyone, rejecting in a violent way or a real negative way the masks.
No, I've not heard anything either.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Okay, seeing no others, I would ask to move on to the next item, which is the 2021 services scenarios, which is item 8.
All right, this is Thomas Whitman, and let me get this started. And hopefully you should be seeing something on your screen right now.
We do.
All right, good. I always love it when technology works. I want to walk through a couple of, to follow on what Michael Tree had to say about some of the service scenarios and where do we go from here. And there's a couple of things I want to touch on. First of them is, Michael covered most of this already, which is what is the initial response and what has the ridership have been, and what are some of the challenges to building back up. Anything from fiscal to some of the other challenges that we might have for this, and what are some of the things we should look at and look for over the next year that help us say the demand is going up, demand is going down, or anything along those ways. And finally, begin looking at a couple of different scenarios that help define, here's how we anticipate ridership to come back, here's how we anticipate potential revenue to come back, and then ultimately end up with the question of, where do we go from here? There's some big questions, there's some big unknowns that we have as we look to the future right here. So I want to start off with the initial response and some of the impacts. And at the March 17 shelter-in-place order has had a tremendous impact on not just mobility, jobs, the economy, you name it. But transit ridership has cratered as a result of this. Throughout the Bay Area and actually nationwide as well. And if we look at, Michael had mentioned, LAFTA's ridership went down nearly 90%. But it's similar for BART service and for ACE service as well. And in response, virtually every regional agency has reduced service to some extent, usually going to a modified weekend schedule. And right now we're at a point where we start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and saying, okay, where do we go from here? What are some of the steps we need to take in order to get there? How did, when we say it's like, where are we right now with the LAFTA service? There's a lot of things that normally would be running this time of year, but simply aren't. None of the school-focused services going to the high schools or middle schools are operating. The commuter services aren't operating. The regular fixed route services on routes 2 and 11 have been cut or delete or have been suspended during this. And every route except for 10R, the Rapid 10 and the Rapid 30 have been placed on weekend schedules. And it started off that both routes, the Rapid 10 and the Rapid 30, they would be at weekend service, but for the social distancing requirements that are there. And I think Michael also touched upon the Go Tri Valley implementation at the 1st of May, but that has been a step to be able to say, you might have lost your fixed route coverage, but you do have an option as we move forward. So this is where we are today. Lots of routes not operating, limited service hours on each one of these. And so I want to start focusing on what are some of the things we can look at and what are some of the challenges that we have that we need to account for as we move forward. And I want to start with funding. Michael mentioned this a little bit about, once CARES funding helps take care of us in fiscal year 21. But what does federal funding look like in the future? What does some of the state of California funding look like? From income tax. What do some of the sales tax projections look like? And these are numbers are from early May, so they could be a little bit different now. But overall, we're seeing somewhere around a 25% drop, or this a drop in both income tax and sales tax projections, which strongly suggests that in a year or so from now that we're going to have challenges in given some of the revenue streams that are there that say that we might not have the same operating dollars that we have right now. We also need to look at, from a funding perspective, what some of the partnerships are with some of the schools, like Las Positas College. Will they still be as big of a contributor? Now that they're not going to be in session, or it's my understanding they're not going to be in session in fall of 2020. How does that partnership look in the future? It's a key part of not just the ridership, the system ridership, but also from the financial contribution that comes along with that. There's also the secondary schools, the high schools, the middle schools. And so there's a series of open questions. And I mean, this is something that is near and dear to my heart because I have high schoolers and middle schoolers myself. And I'm wondering these questions myself of like, are they going back to school ever again? And will they be in the background right here, like, saying I'm talking too loud when I'm on the phone? But the big thing is that, how will they reopen? How will schools reopen? Will it be staggered shifts? Will it be alternating days? Will it be just elementary school kids go to a 5-day-a-week school and everybody else has some sort of different pattern? So there's a lot of unknowns that we as school districts are still working through in terms of helping to try to understand like what is the path forward here, and it's a big challenge. And in certain school districts in the Bay Area, it's like July is going to that's when they're going to start making decisions or hope to start making decisions. Again, there's some unknowns, but I think beyond that there's some questions of how much demand will be on the buses. Will parents feel comfortable, saying, kids, you can go on a bus. There's 50 other kids on there, but just go ahead, be fine. It'll be fine. Or how many parents are going to say, I'm going to drive you to school because I don't feel comfortable having my child, on a bus where there might be more people on this. And there's ways around this. If we can say, okay, we're going to apply some of the social distancing regulations that we have for limiting the number of people on a bus for our school routes. And some of these trips right now, or in February of 2020 and before, were carrying 50 people or more. The buses were packed. They were full. And so if we look at what are the fiscal impacts on, if we need 4 buses to do what currently or what in February 2019 took only 1, there's some real challenges in terms of like, how do I budget for that? How do we make sure that, that LAFTA is whole and we still meet the demand needs that the kids are going to require? So there's not just a demand side to the secondary school opening, but there's also the fiscal implications of some of the social distancing that are potential implications as well. Looking at if we need to provide more service, who pays and how do we make that happen? We sort of touched upon Las Positas College already, that, there's some fiscal sharing, some fiscal contributions that Las Positas College has and some ridership that comes from that. But there's also the open question right now is like, when will they reopen? And how will they reopen? Will the demand be the same in the future? And, is there going to be a partnership that comes to, how's the partnership going to change as the pressures on any one of the educational facilities, higher educational facilities, to reduce their expenses becomes more acute? I think there's also, from the Tri-Valleys perspective, the impact of regional demand and where people are going and what some of the big travel demands have been. And one of the things that we're seeing is that certain job types, certainly by no means all job types, but about 30% of all job types, have some option of being able to telecommute. And certain bigger employers in the Bay Area have already started saying, you can work at home as long as you want. And so the question is like, will the demand levels reach back to what they were in February of 2019? And so some of the clues we can see of like, how that might play out is, direct relationship with, what BART is looking at. BART is projecting that ridership will be lower under any circumstance, moving forward in fiscal year 2021. That the highest that they anticipate ridership coming back in is about 50% of their ridership due to some of the uncertainties of some of their major employers. And so they're looking at a reduced service levels in fiscal year 2021, and this has a direct impact on your service as well. If BART is only operating every 30 minutes, does more frequent service need to be on the feeder bus service than every 30 minutes? So it's a big question in terms of what the demand levels might look like. And there's also, what does the local travel market look like? Certainly we're seeing in some of the ridership, it was like 850 at the beginning of May, it's closer to 1,000 now, some return of the riders to the system. These are people who need the service or using this for everyday trips. But certain trip types might not necessarily be as strong or might take a much longer time to recover. The retail and the mall sector in particular is one of the things that how we're seeing, and this is a nationwide phenomenon of how strongly is retail, like brick and mortar retail, going to respond? And what does that look like? Not just from a jobs perspective or a retail perspective, but this is about what is the amount of revenue that's generated from a sales tax perspective from this this recent trend. The trend has been building, but it's really helped push it forward as the past 3 months have shown. So this is another big unknown in terms of some of the big ridership generators, such as Stone Ridge, and to a lesser extent, the San Francisco Premium Outlets. How do we ensure, how is that coming back? Is it coming back to the same extent? So ultimately, there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of possibilities too. And I haven't touched upon some of the smaller markets, such as when will seniors feel comfortable starting ride service again? And what are the impacts of that might be on both paratransit and fixed route service? So there's different elements that we really have to take a step back and say, where do we go from here? What is the answer? And the honest answer is there is no one answer. It's that we have to look at preparing for different types of scenarios and begin looking at some of the data that are out there and some of the indications that give us clues in terms of how to begin to move forward. So I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the things that triggers that that LAFTA should be looking at and can look at to help restore service. And some of them is something that Michael had mentioned during his presentation about passenger loads. It's really looking at if there are higher passenger loads, how do we respond to them? And what is the appropriate response mechanism for that? And it can depend. If some of the social distancing measures loosen up a little bit, it means that the load impacts are a little bit less. But as we reach the limits of what we can accommodate given social distancing, what do we do? We also need to look at the adoption rate of the Go Tri-Valley service. To see are people utilizing that service more, and where are they utilizing it, so that we have a better understanding of do we need to turn back on some of the fixed routes that we suspended as a part of this. And we also need to look at the health and safety elements on the buses. I think you've been supremely lucky, and I pray that it will continue to be that way. That none of your operators have gotten sick, but many different agencies have not been so lucky. And it's not just what are our cleaning protocols, what are our safety protocols, but also how do we ensure that we keep operators safe and we have sufficient operators to have to put the service on the street. And so these are all things that LAFTA can control and has some control over. But there's also a series of things that are a little bit more interesting and that are beyond your control. And I touched upon some of these earlier, like with terms of BART service levels. If BART goes to 15-minute service on an ongoing basis, what does that do to the Rapid 10 and the Rapid 30? Right now, there's plenty of parking. I mean, I've never seen parking, this much parking available at the Dublin stations. What happens when there's capacity challenges there again? is that a trigger that we should begin looking at, saying, okay, we need to dial up the frequencies of service because we need an alternative to driving to a BART station and making that a reality again. We talked about the schools and the colleges, but also about the office spaces. We talked about, mentioned that, a lot of folks can telecommute, but, it means like, how is that market? How is that longer term market for some of the commuter services, to Hacienda or to, some of the other office parks or industrial areas within the Tri-Valley? What might that look like? And where does that rank in terms of providing access to jobs, yet at the same time making sure that there's sufficient people to make that a worthwhile investment? One of the last pieces that we need to begin to look at is, what are some of the requests for service? It's going to be clear as people become more comfortable with traveling that there's going to be, hey, we want this area to restart service or get service into an area where, the Go Tri-Valley isn't necessarily meeting our needs. So there's a lot of different elements that are out there, and there's a lot of moving parts that are out there that all influence what will demand look like and how will ridership respond for that. So before I get into what are some of the menu of options that we might be looking at, I want to just briefly say, how is service operating in May? And this is a little bit different, look at where's our ridership right now? And these data are from the beginning of May, and ridership has climbed a little bit, but this is passengers per round trip. And so what you can see is, like, on certain routes, like routes 1 and 3, there's less than a passenger per round trip. That means in one direction this bus is empty, and so on average, so the ridership levels on certain routes are very, very low. Other routes such as Rapid 10, Route 15, and Route 30, show, I'm not going to say it's like super great ridership, but overall, the amount of ridership per round trip shows that this is, there's still, a decent number of people being carried. But, close to, it's more, I think it's 85% or, somewhere around there, 85% of all riders right now are being carried on 3 routes, the Rapid 10, the Route 15, and the Rapid 30. So it's just a way to help us understand, like, where's the demand right now, to help us understand where should we begin turning the dial back up once the demand starts increasing more than what it is right now. So we'll use that as context for the 3 different scenarios I wanted to present here. And we're calling these the worst case scenario, best case scenario, and most likely scenario. And again, the honest answer is we don't know what the future holds. And so we want to make sure that we are flexible with how we look at this, both from a budgetary perspective and a ridership perspective, and understand that we need to be flexible as an agency looking into the future, that it's not just like this is the scenario we're picking, but there has to be flexibility in the future as it becomes clear that certain trends go one way or certain trends go another way. So from a worst case scenario perspective, some of the assumptions that we put into this is that there's no vaccine available in the next fiscal year, that some form of social distancing will continue for the entire fiscal year, that there's limited, office reopenings, limited school reopenings, or there's some severe demand restrictions on school reopenings, and that in-store retail continues to have restrictions associated with it. So it's not business as usual, but it's like that, there's, that stores might be open, but it's not how it used to be. The other element from a demand perspective is that BART stays at 30-minute service. Maybe there's a little bit of uptick in service, but overall, BART stays at 30-minute service. A stays at the 2 trains in the morning, 2 trains in the afternoon, and that's it. So when we looked at how would we create a service design for that, it's we'd be looking at doing small, reducing service even further to accommodate the lack of demand that's associated with this, and begin looking at operating routes 15, Rapid 10, and Rapid 30 at today's service levels, and continue to operate Route 1, which is service to the jail, solely for that purpose, to provide that connection between BART and the jail. To allow folks that are being let out, or in particular access to the regional transit station. It would also, from a budgeting perspective, look at for school services, to say, we're going to keep the fiscal year 2021 budget for school services what it is today. And this could be a challenge if social distancing becomes a requirement for school trips. Then the same amount of kids that are being transported today cannot be transported with this budget. So it's, again, looking forward, this is gonna be one of the challenges. But due to low ridership, suspend a series of routes, including routes 2 and 11, which are suspended right now, but also routes 3, 8, and 14. They are not carrying. 3 is not carrying that many people. Routes 8 and 14 are also, they're carrying more people, but they're still not carrying a huge number of people. And also, because of the lack of a commuter market right now and a projected lack of commuter market in the future, that some of the, or in the next fiscal year at least, that the express services such as the 20X, 70X, 550, 580X would not be operated. And the routes 53 and 54, as ACE continues to operate, that connection between ACE and BART would continue to meet the trains that are operating. So that is the worst case scenario. And I want to transition that into the best case scenario now. And again, this is just a scenario. It's not a recommendation that we go with any of these. But the best case scenario assumes that a vaccine becomes available in late 2020. And that it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be vaccinated by late 2020, but it becomes a possibility. And that means that some sort of form of social distancing will continue for part of the year, but not necessarily the entire part of the year. But it means that things are going to get back to normal more quickly. And it's like some limited office and school reopenings in 21, and definitely more is the remainder of the fiscal year plays out. And in-store retail, we're making the assumption, from a demand perspective that, no matter what happens over the fiscal year in terms of even if there's a vaccine, that retail is going to take a little bit longer to recover from its trip-making propensity than what it is, what it was in February. And one of the other things, if this scenario happens, then BART, we would be looking for BART to upgrade its services, or we're assuming that BART would upgrade its services to every 15 minutes over what there is today. And ACE, puts a third train back on as well. So what this would mean is like the school services would have the same fiscal year budget as the fiscal year, the budget would not change. Be looking at restoring 15-minute service on the rapid routes on the 10 and the 30, restoring weekday service levels on Route 15. This is, was the other highest ridership route, and restoring services on the less productive routes, such as routes 1, 3, 8, and 14, but the weekend levels only. So limited is, stand not as late and not as early. But certain routes, such as Route 2 and Route 11, would still not operate due to lower ridership, and the commuter services, which will be probably one of the last pieces that will come back, as the white collar market in particular is anticipated to be much slower adopters of getting back on transit. We're anticipating for as in this scenario that commuter services will not come back in fiscal year 2021. And routes 53 and 54 will continue to operate, much like they do right now. And if there is additional need for demand, or if there's additional need for capacity, that the provisions in this have been made for standby buses, so that a bus can be dispatched to help from a capacity perspective. So there's one more scenario I want to walk through and look at whether the ridership and the fiscal implications of these scenarios. The demand scenarios for the most likely scenario, and this is there is part of this is a guess, but it's sort of like this is the in between these. It assumes that some vaccine might become available in mid to late fiscal year 2021. That means that social distancing is going to continue through almost the entire rest of the year. There's limited office and retail openings, and BART's staying at 30-minute service predominantly throughout the day, and ACE continues with its 2 trains. So what this means is that from a projections, from a scenario perspective, is from a ridership demand perspective, is that we should begin looking at operating routes 1, 15, rapid 10, and rapid 30 at today's service levels, having the school services at today's budgeted levels, take some of the lower ridership routes and only operate them during part of the day, and that includes routes 3, 8, and 14. While ridership is growing very, very slowly on these, it's still their magnitude of productivity less than all the other routes. And so begin looking at making sure that we can try to conserve some of our fiscal resources, just make sure that we have a balanced budget and look ahead into the future as well. And then again, as with some of the other scenarios, due to low ridership, routes 2, 11, and the express services would not operate, and then routes 53 and 54 would continue to provide those connections between BART and ACE. And likewise, with the best case scenario, the provision for the standby buses would be there as well. So what does this look like in terms of where we are today and what the budget that you adopted, the board adopted, originally, which was 100, we call it like 139,000 hours of service, and the anticipation that we'd have close to 8,000 riders a day. And this is school kids, college kids, folks going to BART, folks making trips throughout the Tri-Valley area. In the worst case scenario, we're looking at 55%, or service levels being 55% of what they were budgeted for, and the ridership being significantly less. And estimated, 1,200 riders a day is, is what we'd be looking at here. And this is we're assuming very few school kids in this scenario. Or a limited number of school kids, and certainly the commute market not necessarily being anywhere close to as strong as it was in the past as well. In the best case scenario, we're assuming a much higher number of hours associated with this. The ridership levels being significantly higher as well. And like 50, looking at that ridership has recovered almost 50% of what it is right now, but it's still not close to the 8,000 number that we saw, that we were anticipating when when the budgets were developed for fiscal year 21. And for the most likely scenario, we'll be looking at about half of the budget that we anticipated, a little under that. And about 25% of the ridership that was anticipated. So again, not this is something that could build, and but it we'd not be seeing at the end of fiscal year 21 seeing 8,000 riders a day, but it was like a slow build, but there's a cap on how far we can go. So this is not, I'm not going to say this is a rosy, any of these are necessarily that rosy scenario, but this is what you have to look forward to. And these are 3 different scenarios, and things could be different. But if I look at what projections are for travel demand within the Bay Area, what some of the employment patterns might be, and what some of your peer agencies are looking at in terms of recovery planning, these are in line with what we would anticipate seeing with that. So I want to transition from that to what are some of the key considerations, and open this up for questions for this. But some of the things that we wanted to make sure that these scenarios were based on was looking at sustainable service levels, making sure that we match service levels with demand. And so that folks weren't riding, if folks weren't utilizing a service, should we be providing that service out there? And looking at if we needed to do a service reduction or suspending service until the demand is back, where would that be? And those were predominantly in areas where the service, the ridership simply wasn't there. At the same time, we need to make sure that there's coverage there for those who don't have options. LAFTA service is a lifeline for folks, and we want to make sure that folks still have the ability to go shopping, for social visits, and medical trips. This is one of the purposes, one of the key reasons that LAFTA exists. So, making sure that that is a key consideration for how we either contract or look at restarting service is key there, as is job access. We all want to see people have the ability to get to jobs and restart the economy, restart, and getting, there's more people have income, more people, sales tax revenues. It's a virtual cycle. It's a virtual cycle that we want to help with the process of reestablishing it. But then, one of the other key considerations, I brought this up a couple of times, is the challenges of school services and what the fiscal implications are of that. There is no one answer right now. Anything that we do, and from a scenario planning perspective and looking into the next fiscal year, is going to require a close look at what's going on right now. We're in quite many ways, we're in uncharted territories. Nobody has ever dealt with something that we've dealt with right now that has eviscerated transit demand and said, the game is new. Nobody knows what the rules are, but we have to maintain, we have to maintain flexibility to be able to look at what the patterns are and change accordingly. And so to make sure that that flexibility is there, we need to look at ridership and budget data, so that we can see what the trends are and act accordingly, and act as quickly as you have when the pandemic started, to make sure that we continue to be an option for mobility. We continue to support the regional goals, and we continue to be a key part of the economy of the Tri-Valley area. So with that, I'm gonna stop talking, and hopefully I can't see everybody's screen, but let me put you on right here. And I'm not sure how you want to start a discussion or talk about some of the things you've heard here, or if raising your hand.
Thomas, I would say a very thorough presentation. You're thinking about a lot of things that are going on in the world. There's just a lot of different scenario plays here. I guess the only question I have would be when do we see the next phase? And then I'll open it up, obviously, for questions from the group.
When you say, when do we see the next phase?
When will we see the final report?
For the scenarios?
Yeah, no, the scenario. When will we see more data on which scenario is playing out? I guess along the way.
I think that is along the way. And Michael, maybe you can help with this question a little bit.
Yeah, our game plan is basically the first month of each quarter to bring back to the board the performance of the system and actually how it's playing out for comment and adjustments.
Okay. Any other questions from the group? Let's get back to group mode. I don't see any. Well, how do I check for raised hands? This is okay. There we go. Participants. Scanning for raised hands.
David, you have Bob Warner.
Okay. Bob Warner, I do see a blue raised hand next to your name. You're up.
Okay, I'll lower it now for you. But the question I had was a follow on to where you guys were just going is, it looks like we've got our plan in place for a few months. And I think what I heard is, with respect to our budget, with the current operations, we've got the money to see us through the end of the next year, or till 21, right? So that we don't really have to do any adjustments for a while, for a year. Is that basically it? But what I'm hearing is, based on these kind of considerations, we will, if appropriate, before the beginning of a year from now. Is that the way to think about this?
Yeah, I think you got it right, Bob. Basically, the budget that you'll look at in a few minutes that follows this agenda item is built on that most likely scenario playing out, and then we'll make adjustments as we go throughout the fiscal year. But we should, if the most likely scenario plays out, we should be able to balance that operating budget based on what you see.
And I like the answer that every quarter you'll tell us how we're doing relative to the scenarios. So thank you.
Very good. Seeing no other hands raised, this is an information item, right? So we'll move on to the next item, which is capital and operating budgets.
Yes, thank you. So tack on to what Thomas just said. We have been working since, I guess, mid-March, maybe a little before mid-March, to try and figure out what next year looks like. We have consulted with not only other transit agencies, but our funding agencies. And we have received multiple scenarios from them. They think they have it down, then something changes and they revise it. So we actually created our own scenarios. The scenario that we think is most likely in terms of revenues is not far off from what we've received from MTC. It's a little bit more conservative than MTC. We prefer to be more conservative and then have things be more rosy. But that's what we're looking at in our scenarios. The board did approve a fiscal year 21 capital and operating budget. We will need an approval today to revise the capital budget because we're asking to add a few projects. But in terms of operating, we can stick with the operating budget that we have in terms of what we requested from MTC. And then we will bring back to you kind of what's actually happening in terms of both revenues and expenses. The scenario we've brought you is based on our revenue anticipation, what we think it's going to look like. And on both the revenue and expense side, it's a $2.3 million decrease from the fiscal year 21 budget that you've approved. That's an 11% decrease. That is made possible, as Michael mentioned, because we are using both tranches of the CARE Act. So we're expecting 5 million, hopefully more, but again, we budget conservatively in fiscal year 21 from the CARES Act. We didn't need to use it in fiscal year 20 because we responded so quickly, we were able to realize some savings. So we believe we're going to be able to finish fiscal year 20 out without needing to tap into any of that CARES Act money. The capital budget, the adjustments that we added onto the capital budget are 3 projects. Michael mentioned the Atlantis facility. There will be a local match to that when we get into building, but right now we need some funds for planning. If we have those funds for planning and then there's some additional federal capital funds that come up, we'll be in a position to tap into those. Without a plan, we won't be. We've put in some money for some safety panels for the buses, and in case this, becomes long-term. And then Michael mentioned having our app, our transit app, show what the loads on the buses look like. So we will need to, if we go forward with that, that would be the real-time APC, automatic passenger counters, so that we can notify passengers who are looking at the app, how full the bus is and will there be a seat for them. Right now, that's not a problem. We're anticipating at some point ridership will go up and we'll have to be making adjustments. I've presented the best case, the likely case, and the worst case, and what that does with our expenses versus our anticipated revenues, and what that will do to our reserves. When we brought the 21 budget to you originally, we had over 18 million anticipated to be in reserves. That, of course, all changed. And with us adding these capital projects, some money will have to come out of reserves, regardless of which scenario we go with. It's just a matter of, if ridership takes off and we need to add buses, we'll of course need to pull more reserves out. If things don't and we keep the same service level or decrease it, it would of course be less reserves. But even with the likely case, the middle case scenario, it leaves us with 18 million in reserves. However, it only leaves us with about 6 million, which does fall in the board's policy of 3 to 6 months of reserves. After we take out the money we're going to need for our bus purchase in the next few years, and the money we need to set aside for Atlantis for the local match if we are able to do construction. With that, I will entertain any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any questions? Scanning for raised hands. Seeing none. This is,
We'll need a motion to revise the capital budget.
all right. I'll make a motion that we approve the revised capital budget for fiscal year 2021.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
John Haggerty,
Yep.
Melissa Hernandez,
Yes.
David Hubbard,
Yes.
Carla Brun,
Yes.
Jerry Penton,
Yes.
Bob Coomber,
Yes.
Bob Warner.
Yes.
All right, very well. Passes unanimously. Item 10 is the annual salary band review. Can-
So,
Tamara, I'm having trouble hearing you. Am I the only one? It's gargled.
I agree.
let me try this. Is that better?
Mm-mm.
No, it's not you, it's the computer.
Do you want to go to the next item and I can call in?
Sure, it's like you have one of those voice alterator things. Anyway.
Okay, I'll actually, if you want, I can do this item. I'll just run into Tone's office and use his computer.
All right.
He's literally next door.
Mhm.
Okay. Oh, start video. There we go.
can hear you perfectly.
Here I
Thank
am.
you.
Can you hear me better? Great.
Yep.
Okay. So with our board approved policy, each year we use a third-party consultant to go out and do a salary band comparison with other agencies. This is a comparison of the salary bands only, not what staff is actually making, but to make sure that our salary bands are in line with our comparator agencies. They are. The good news is our salary bands are in line. And so with that, we recommend increasing the bottom and the top of each salary band by the CPI for April. As you can imagine, April's CPI was lower than it has been in the past. So we're recommending an increase of 1.1% to each of these salary bands. We also added a position when we brought the fiscal year 21 budget to you. We had a capital projects position in that budget. We have changed that. We've instead taken the capital projects position and kind of divided up that work amongst a number of people here. And instead, we would like to use those funds for a senior operations specialist to help with our fixed route operations contract. It's the same dollar amount, same salary band, but we feel that would be a better use of the funds. And that's it.
All right. A modest increase on the salary bands. Any raised hands? I see none. This doesn't mean we're changing salaries. It just means we're changing the salary bands. Is that right?
Exactly. Raises are based off merit only. The only way the salary band change would affect anybody is if we had anybody at the very bottom of the salary band, and then of course they would have to be moved up. We have nobody in that position.
I see a raised hand from Commissioner Haggerty.
Well, I understand that this is just increasing the bands, and I certainly understand that, but I want to, and I've said this at the Air District and I've said it other places, that we need to understand that cities and counties are having a tremendous problem right now with their budgets. We had ours balanced at about $75 million reduction, and we're getting hit with about another $125 million COVID issue, and that's on top of the $400 million that we've spent. So I would think, Michael, you need to be very careful, and you need to think this through when you start giving raises, because we'll probably start furloughing people.
Very good. Any other comments? I would have to echo.
Comment from Michael on that?
Michael, you want to respond back? Are you talking on mute, Mike? Michael, come
No,
on,
I'm
let's
here.
hear you.
No, I hear you loud and clear, and we haven't talked much in regard to any increases. My perception at this point is that there will not be any. It'll be just kind of flatline with the recognition of certainly what's going on with other member agencies.
I would say that having that dialogue clearly and often and understood and get feedback from people, I think they deserve a voice. Let them, voice that with the team. But we can't just let everybody has to be kind of on the same page with this. And I know you'll do a great job with that, Michael, but I'll also echo Commissioner Haggerty's comments of concern. Thank you. With that, is this an item that we have to take action on?
Yes.
I'll make the motion that we accept the item as presented.
I'll second the motion.
All right. Roll call vote, please.
Todd Haggerty,
Yep.
Melissa Hernandez,
Yes.
David Halbert,
Yes.
Carla Brown,
Yes.
Jerry Penton,
Yes.
Bob Coomber,
Yes.
Bob Warner.
I think no.
All right. Moving on to item 11, resolution in support of allocation request fiscal year 2017-18 funding through the State Law Carbon Transit Operations Program, LCTOP.
Okay, thanks. That one is mine. I hope you can hear me. So this item requests that the Board of Directors approve a resolution in support of an allocation request to Caltrans for LC top funding for the Fare Free Rides promotion using previously allocated FY 17-18 funds. This resolution is required for LAFTA to request approval of this project from Caltrans. Just real briefly, this is a follow-on item to an item the board approved last month involving our fiscal year 19-20 allocation request to Caltrans for our LC top funding. What this action today is basically to authorize the creation of a new project with Caltrans, which is the Fare Free Rides promotion, using a prior year allocation of funding that LAFTA actually has already received. The prior year funding was kind of pushed forward by a year and combined with another year of funding for a future purchase of zero emission vehicles. But what this project will do in terms of utilizing this older money first for Fare Free Rides is, on the one hand, it can actually backfill actual lost fare revenue we've incurred since going fare free at the beginning of the shelter in place order. So that's a key a key thing this fund source would enable us to do. It will also then, and we've made that request to Caltrans already to make the money available to do that. And then it would also free up basically some operating capacity in FY 21 as we wish to attract riders back to the system using Fare Free Rides, some kind of incentive, I think yet to be determined. I think you heard a lot about what these different scenarios might look like as riders come back to the system. We both want to incentivize that. But at the same time, we understand we need to address potential capacity issues on our buses. So this allocation is intended to provide that flexibility we need going into FY 21. The total amount of funding available is, including interest we have received on the allocation since 2018, is $328,664. And also included in the staff report as attachment 3 is a letter from the TAC in support of a potential Fare Free Rides pilot. So again, staff's recommendation is to approve the resolution in support of the LC top allocation request to Caltrans for the Fare Free Rides program. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
All right, scanning the commission for raised hands. And seeing none. Okay. This is also an action item.
It is.
Move it.
Should be.
That's a motion by Councilmember Haggerty, I think.
Thanks for the promotion, Supervisor.
Oh my God, Councilmember Haggerty, Super Commissioner Haggerty. Okay, and Penton, you get to second it, is that right?
I am a council member.
Okay,
That
who
would be
did
Governor
Penton? We're not going to start anything. Who made the motion and who seconded? All right, Penton is the second. Supervisor Commissioner Haggerty is the maker of that motion. May I please have a roll call?
Scott Hegarty,
Yep.
Melissa Hernandez,
Yes.
David Hubbard,
Yep.
Carla Brown,
Yes, yes.
Jerry Penton,
Yes.
Bob Cooper,
Yes.
Bob Warner.
Yes.
All right. Passes unanimously. The next item 12 is the bus exterior advertising contract, amending option for year one term.
Got to hit that button. This one's mine. We have a contract with Lamar Transit Advertising. They sell the advertising on the exterior of our buses. The terms of the contract have been that they pay us a minimum annual guarantee of $95,000 or 50% of sales, whichever is more. And as you know, for the last 3 years, it's always been well more. We've gotten checks from them for about $30,000 every year because their ad sales have exceeded the guarantee by a significant amount. However, in the current environment, they're having a very difficult time, as you can imagine, making sales of advertisements, and many of their advertisers have canceled or suspended their advertisements since their businesses are shut and they can't have customers. And as a result, the average monthly sales for Lamar in the last couple of months have dipped dramatically. At the same time, one of the other components that goes into developing a proposal for a revenue contract is the amount of service that you have on the street. And we currently have about 30% of what we previously had on the street as far as vehicles. And so the value from us to Lamar is not as high either. So Lamar's approached us and asked us if we would consider taking a recommendation to the board, because you've already approved the first option year of the contract that begins July 1. So their request was that we eliminate the minimum annual guarantee component and just go to a 50-50 split of all revenues. And we thought that that sounded like a fair way to go for the coming year, given the situation we're in. So that's the staff recommendation.
All right. Any questions? I have a question. Have they done this with that exact recommendation with any of the other companies?
Yes, Salt Lake City and Phoenix, they're doing it as the contract years expire. And so Salt Lake City and Phoenix have both agreed to the same elimination of the minimum annual guarantee and just going to a 50-50 split of revenues.
All right. Seeing no other raising of the hands, I'll make a motion that we amend this agreement with them. And
I'll second.
Who made the second?
Hernandez.
Very good. seconded by Commissioner Hernandez. Roll call vote, please.
Scott Haggerty,
No.
Melissa Hernandez,
Yes.
David Hubbard,
Yes.
Carla Brown,
Yes.
Jerry
Sorry.
Penton,
Yes.
Bob Cooper,
Yes.
Bob Warner.
Yes.
All right. With that, we move on to item 13, the exciting election of the LAFTA chair and vice chair.
Mr.
I'll
Chair,
open nominations and see Supervisor Haggerty.
can I nominate Bob as chair and Jerry Penton as vice chair?
You can do anything you want.
Well, I did it, and I think that's the rotation, so it's pretty anticlimactic.
I'll second it. And I'll call for the roll call.
Scott Haggerty,
Yes.
Melissa Hernandez,
Yes.
David Hubbard,
Yes.
Carla Brown. Carla Brown,
Sorry. Yes.
Jerry Penton,
Yes.
Bob Cooper,
Yes.
Bob Warner.
Yes.
Excellent. Just for the record, in this meeting, Halbert and Haggerty made most of the motions and seconds and voted almost identically. Hey, with that, we're at matters introduced by the Board of Directors. Anybody have anything to introduce?
What are you trying to say? I'm out of a job in 6 months.
Yeah, but you'll always, always, always have a space in my heart. I see no other questions, no other motions to be made for matters introduced. So with that, we are adjourned until July 6th at 5:34, and we will swear Jerry Penton in at that, no, Bob in at that time? Or just it happens? All right, we're adjourned.